You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. On today's episode, as part of the Engage Safety Series, How It Works with Jeremy Maclellan from the Central Air Safety Committee. Here's your host, Ryan Argenta.
Welcome back to the Engage podcast. I'm here with Jeremy Maclellan of the Central Air Safety Committee. Jeremy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're talking about shifted report times. This is where you're perhaps on a layover or you're starting a rotation and all of a sudden tracking shifts your report time, perhaps commonly misunderstood or misapplied. Jeremy, kick it off. What are shifted report times? How does it affect us? And how do we get it right? Set us straight.
Absolutely. Thanks for teeing that up. So when we talk about shifted report times, what we're really talking about is on a layover. You land, you go to the hotel, and you have an expectation that you're going to have about 12 hours of rest time in the hotel room, whatever you want to call it. And you're going to have a certain van pickup time tomorrow morning for a, let's say, 6 a.m. report time to the airport. At some point after you go to bed, or maybe even after you wake up the next morning, a phone call comes in, tracking is trying to get a hold of you to let you know that for whatever reason, your flight's delayed. And instead of reporting to the airport at 6 a.m., we now want you to come to the airport at 8 a.m. I think with the intent that we'll keep you in the hotel room, let you continue to try to rest or relax or something to that effect. So big picture, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. And so it sounds like once you're in your rest window, the company can't really reach out to you or you don't have to acknowledge it. So how does this process happen? How do you know they have a shifted report time? And if you set your alarm for 5:30 for a 6 a.m. pickup and your alarm goes off and then you see, oh, well, actually pickup is at 8 or report time is at 8, are you really going to get rest or go back to sleep? Some may and some may not. So how does that affect us in duty day and all the follow-on things?
Exactly. This is really where it becomes challenging. There's a scenario where the company could let you know of a shifted report time 10 or more hours from your report. So this would be you land from your last flight last night and they told you right then, they already know the flight's going to be delayed. If you have 10 or more hours to your report, then you have that 10-hour minimum rest time. So whatever the shifted report time is the next day, all of your FDP limits are going to be based off that new report time. This is not the one we're really concerned about. There's enough time conceptually there for you to adjust your sleep and your rest and be ready for that next day. The situation we're really concerned with is when it happened with less than 10 hours to report. There's a number of scenarios where this could happen. Again, Ryan, you're totally correct about no obligation to answer the phone, read a message pushed under the door, anything of that nature. So I'll lay out how this really happens and what the book answer is when a shifted report time happens. And then we'll talk about a couple scenarios that answer your question more in depth. When did I find out about this shifted report time? Where am I in the reporting process? And how do I handle that situation? Because it can have some significant effects on your duty day that you may not understand. The book answer is if your report time is delayed, and I do want to stop there for a second and make sure everybody understands, they cannot shift your report time earlier. It will always be later unless they've given you more than 10 hours notice. So if it's the morning of, they can't say, hey, we need you to hustle up and get to the airport. That's not allowed. So it would always be a later report time. And what happens is if you had a 7 a.m. report time and they have now moved it to 9 a.m., your FDP limit for the day is now going to be based off of 9 a.m. It's off of that later shifted report time. Here's the kicker that most people don't understand. You were scheduled to report at 7 a.m. So that time from 7 to 9 a.m., that 2-hour window is actually considered what they call a pseudo RAP or reserve availability period. So you're treated like you're a short call pilot, even if you're a regular line holder. There is no obligation to the company, so they can't give you some other trip or give you any additional flying. That's why they call it a pseudo RAP. But they call it that because your entire day is treated like you were on short call. So instead of having a 12-hour FDP, which we'll talk about an example in a second, but let's say you had a 12-hour FDP, they've now shifted your report time. Your new FDP is probably 14 hours now because they made it later. Then you have to add in that 2 hours, like if you were on short call, So the wrap plus the FDP gives you a max day. So now instead of being good for 12 hours, you're now conceptually good for 16 total hours. And again, we'll talk through an example, but you are treated like a short call pilot for that day. So the other important footstop for that is that FDP is no longer extendable. And a lot of people do get confused by that. You cannot extend that FDP because you are being treated like a short call pilot for that day.
Okay. And just to clarify, when you say you're being treated like a short call, and the way I understand this is that wrap, right? Even though you're in the hotel, maybe you're having a cup of coffee or breakfast and you're not at the airport, you're still not in active rest. Therefore, it is part of your availability window.
That's correct. It's part of your duty day. So,
okay.
Yeah, that 2 hours does play into it. And we'll talk about that, of how that affects your FDP and table B and table C limit.
So where is this biting pilots?
All right, well, let me give you an example, and maybe this will highlight how this is biting pilots. So let's imagine you're a Seattle-based pilot, and you're on day 4 of your 4-day rotation. So it's go home day. You're in Boston on a layover, and you had a 7 a.m. Boston report time. That's a 4 a.m. body clock base acclimated report time. So if you look at table B, which is the unaugmented flight duty period limit table, and you look at 4 a.m. and you had one flight home, that's going to tell you you're good for a 10-hour FDP today. Okay. You wake up and you're in the shower for your 7 a.m. report time. And when you come out, you see you have a message from crew tracking. So you listen to your voicemail after you get dressed, suitcase packed. You may still be in the room. You may have gone downstairs to meet up with the other crew member or crew members. And you check your voicemail and tracking says, hey, your inbound flight's delayed. You're now not going to report till 9 a.m. Sounds like no big deal, right? I'll stay at the hotel, maybe grab some breakfast, like you said, a cup of coffee. Probably not going to get more sleep. Maybe some pilots can turn all that off and go back to sleep for an hour, but the data shows that most are not going to. So you pull up your rotation and your 10-hour FDP is now showing 14 hours. Pilots will say, well, how did that happen? Well, instead of a 4 a.m. body clock report time, you now have a 6 a.m. body clock report time. You look at table B, that's going to give you a totally different number. So now you're good for a longer day in and of itself before we even include the wrap.
Okay. That makes sense. You've shifted into, quote, normal body clock timing, which enables you to do more work and have a bigger duty day, which is probably an incentive for crew tracking to shift your report time so they can get more meat out of you, right?
Sure.
And you're talking table B. I'm going to link this to the podcast description. So if you're listening now, you can actually pause, go back to the description, click on the link, and all the tables will be there that Jeremy's talking about. They're also found in the PWA. And where else, Jeremy?
Specifically on the iPad and AeroDocs under the ALPA folder and fatigue resources.
Perfect. So if you're in this scenario, then, you go there as a resource and start looking. And so I think the big takeaway here, first of all, is if you have a shifted report time, it's probably a bigger deal than you think. It's not just necessarily, okay, cool, I'll stay at the hotel and have breakfast now. It's, oh, cool, I'll stay at the hotel and have breakfast, and I could potentially have a longer duty day and get worked a little harder throughout the day, which kind of opens you up to reroutes and some of the optimizer things that we all love so much.
Absolutely. And just to kind of put an exclamation point on this whole thing, in the example I gave where you were good for a 10-hour FDP, and because of the shifted report time, you're now per table B good for 14 hours. What we haven't talked about yet is that 2-hour reserve availability period at the beginning where you stayed at the hotel and had some coffee and breakfast. That fits into this also. So you're actually good for a 16-hour day in this example, the 2-hour wrap plus a 14-hour FDP. So you went to bed last night and slept and rested for one leg home, a max of a 10-hour FDP. Now you're good for a 16 total hour day. So you were planning on blocking in back in Seattle about 11 a.m. Seattle time. And now you're legal to go until 8 p.m. that night. And that's what most pilots don't understand. This is a bit of an example that shows the kind of the worst case scenario that can happen to you. This does happen with some regularity, but most pilots do not understand or don't accept. I'm a line holder. How did I turn into a short call pilot? You're not really doing that, but the effect it has on your day is just like you're a short call pilot.
Yeah, just using those terms interchangeably to help you understand that period of time between your original report and the shifted report does have an effect on your overall duty day.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Okay. And while we're at it, for those who are on short call or those who are on reserve, right? When you start short call, you can't be resting while you're on short call. So that period of time that you're on short call counts for those tables. So when you get called to fly a flight and you look at that table and say, well, I'm good for 16 hours, but I've already sat short call for 6 of those, it shortens how much you can do. And in the international scheme, that's a bigger deal where I know when I sit short call on the wide body fleet, there's a certain point where you're just not usable for a 10-hour flight.
That's correct. Yep. And the thing I want all the pilots to understand when we're talking about, at least in this scenario, an unaugmented domestic example, it is table B plus 4 hours up to a maximum of 16 hours. So for an unaugmented domestic crew, that number will never be greater than 16 hours. It could be less, but it'll never be greater than that, no matter how much the math works out to be.
Yeah. And so looking at these tables, it can be a little difficult. We're sitting here, we're on a podcast. If you're listening to this, you're probably driving or running or jogging, maybe commuting. And so if you're in the heat of the moment and you're looking at these shifted report times and you go to the table and you're trying to figure it out, and I know this scenario well, and you're talking to your crew going, well, I think it's 14 hours. No, I think it's 16 hours. Well, we have a wrap because of this, and just slow down for a second. And if you have a question, call the duty pilot, call crew tracking and sort it out with them and have the table open, look in the PWA, look in that fatigue resource on the ALPA folder on the company iPad and walk through it with them. Don't just accept it and say, well, shift to report time, I'll grab breakfast, whatever, because this could affect you further down the road.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, that's a good place to talk about when you were notified or when you found out about the shift to report time, because that actually does change this. And I want to make sure that that's made clear as well. So to your point, so far, we've only talked about you're in your hotel room and you get a call and you answer it. Okay. A lot of people have their phones on do not disturb or have a habit of, I'm not contactable right now because I've planned my rest and I've planned my day the way I was scheduled. So you go downstairs, fully dressed, packed up, ready to go. You get in the van and that's when, you're on your way to the airport and you look at your flight for the day and you see, wait a second, we have a 7 a.m. report. This is showing 9 a.m. now. Why is that? Well, at that point, are you really going to turn around and go back to the hotel? Our data would show that's not what happens. So in that scenario, you've already begun the process, if you will, of reporting, or you get to the airport and that's the first time you realize it. Now what? Now what do you do? And I would say in that scenario, your responsibility is to call the company and tell them, I've already reported. The important thing is to make sure after you've told them I've already reported that they put your FTP limits back to what they were supposed to be based on your original report time. And we have multiple ASAPs where that does not always happen. So That's when it starts to get muddy with what is my FTP limit for the day, because my rotation is showing something, but that's not right because I actually reported. So the whole shifted report time thing in reality never happened to me.
Makes sense. Yeah. Hey, I've already reported. And so that's a call to crew tracking for sure.
That's correct.
A duty pilot of the backup and say, no, put me back to the original show time. I've already reported. And so my FTP limits are based on that time. So keep an eye on it. Keep that in the back of your head. I would brief that as a threat almost, and just have it in the back of your mind. Slow things down and think about, okay, this is different. I need to keep track of it. Those FTP limits on your rotation and in my crew are nearly impossible to decipher. There's a lot involved. And really, again, the big takeaway here is if this is affecting you, slow down, you have resources, and file an ASAP. If you have flown inadvertently within this or beyond your FTP limits because of these issues, file an ASAP, talk to the Central Air Safety Committee. Jeremy, I want to ask you about, we talked about domestic and table B. What about augmented international flights? Because I feel like this is more common, or at least common for international flights. You're in your hotel overnight, your inbound flight is delayed, and you wake up at 3 a.m. for your pee break and you find a note under your hotel room door and you say, oh, good, we get another 3 hours. Is that the same thing?
It is conceptually, yes. It's very similar to the unaugmented scenario I talked about above and all the other things that we've talked about, but I will hit a couple of highlights that are different for augmented crews. Because as you said, it does seem to happen more often with augmented crews. The math gets more complicated due to acclimation challenges. So whatever city you're currently acclimated to can affect the table of how long your FTP is. So for an example, you are Atlanta based and you're on day 3 of a rotation. You landed in Paris this morning. You go to the hotel, grab a nap, head out for the day to go enjoy Paris. You come back, grab dinner, head to bed, and you're planning on a 0840 Paris report time the next day. At some point, like you said, you get up for a mid-evening restroom break or whenever you figure it out, and you find out that your inbound flight, the airplane you're taking back, is delayed multiple hours. So tracking has called you or left a message with the hotel and said, your report time instead of 8:40 is now going to be 12:40 p.m. So it's a 4-hour shifted report time. I won't complicate everything with digging into table C, but that's the augmented flight duty period limit table. You have a 3-person crew in a category 1 rest facility. So if you go in and do the math and look at your FTP limit for the day, you were originally looking at 14 hours and 30 minutes. That's because table C limit for that scenario is 15 hours, but you have to subtract 30 minutes because the crew is not acclimated. So now you have a 12:40 report time. What does that do to your FTP? Well, now it took it to 16 hours, but now we subtract the 30 minutes for the acclimation or lack thereof. So now you're at 15 hours and 30 minutes, but you've got to add the 4-hour wrap in, that 4-hour delay shifted report time that you had. So where table C in the augmentation table is different than the unaugmented domestic table B is that there's no 16-hour maximum. So for augmented, table B says from the start of the short call, or in this case, the wrap, to the end of the FTP cannot exceed table C plus 4 hours. So in this scenario I've given you, you're now good for an 18-hour and 30-minute day, whereas originally you were only good for 13 and a half. So you can see what kind of difference that can make to your day.
Yeah. And I think my mind goes to, okay, so what, now I'm eligible for an 18.5-hour duty day. It's whatever. It's a 9-hour block back to Atlanta. I'm done. I'm going home, whatever. But now start thinking about the rolling delay, the maintenance delay on arrival, all the things that could add up and happen. And now you're at your original FDP or maybe inside of your original FDP and you're still going because this shifted report. So things to consider without getting into the nitty gritty of a hypothetical example, but get into those tables, B and C for sure. Talk to crew tracking, talk to the duty pilot and ask. People love stories. Jeremy, I don't know if you have a story for this one. I had a scenario like this in Amsterdam where we had a shifted report time by 3 hours. And the hotel there went around and knocked on everybody's door and said, yeah, I shifted report time, but you have to get out of your room because we've got to turn it to another crew. So here we are, the whole crew sitting in the lobby, drinking coffee, looking at each other, saying, I can't believe they kicked us out of our rooms. And so the captain called the duty pilot and said, no, we essentially showed at our original show time, you've got to make that happen. And they did. And so those are important things. Talk to the crew, captain authority, and also your own assessment, right? Like we're talking about the book rules, the tables. Oh, I'm good for 18.5 hours now, but you haven't slept all night and now you have a shifted report time and now you're dealing with rolling delays. When you sign that fitness for duty release, you're saying, hey, I'm good to go for 18.5 hours on the backside of the clock. So consider that too, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to say is regardless of all this math and mental gymnastics and those of you listening, trying to keep up with all the numbers being thrown around, the point at the end of the day is when you sign that release, you're certifying a couple of things, right? So we can do all this math and have the perfect FDP and wrap and what's my duty day and all of that. And that's an FAR that we cannot violate. So you need to make sure that is correct. But just because you're good for 18.5 hours or 16 hours, the other part of what you're signing for yourself on is your fitness for duty. And that's also an FAR. So just because you're legal for 18.5 hours, you are responsible for your own fitness for duty. And so that needs to be constantly assessed. So in the domestic scenario I gave you, I was planning on one leg. Now I'm good for this much longer day. And they decide to reroute me into 2 legs or 3. That doesn't mean that you're rested and fit for that. And so you do need to constantly assess your own fitness. And again, just because it's legal doesn't mean you're fit for that based on your individual scenario. Same with the augmented international example. You need to assess your personal fitness for that flight. And if they kicked you out of your room, or you slept terrible the night before, or maybe you're an FO that's on day 6 and the other 2 crew members are on day 3, and this is your 3rd ocean crossing, maybe you're not at the same level they are at. So again, it's a very individualized thing, but just because tracking tells you it's legal and they don't change any of the numbers, you still hold the ultimate final hammer in your own personal fitness.
Make that fatigue call.
Absolutely.
All right. We've talked shifted report times with Jeremy Maclellan. Anything else to add on shifted report times?
Just want to highlight, there's lots of resources. There's the dispatcher, there's the duty pilot, there's crew tracking. And if you're not getting the help or the answers that you need from those, you've got a multitude of resources in AeroDocs, as well as for any time critical FAR 117 issues, 1-800-USA-ALPA will get you in touch with somebody that can help you iron this out. Because at the end of the day, this is not a fly now, grieve later situation. You have to ensure your legality before you fly. So don't hesitate to expand the team, reach out, try to get as much information as you can. At the end of the day, also, like you said, don't hesitate to file an ASAP if you feel something was unsafe, or if you're not fit, call the duty pilot and go down that road.
Very good. Well, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Thanks for bringing this out. This is an important topic, and we'll leave it at that. Jeremy Maclellan, Central Air Safety, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been Engaged, the podcast for Delta pilots. Thanks for listening. My name is Ryan Argenta. Stay safe and keep the rubber on the road.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.